All right, so let's finish off with Ruth chapter 4. So I promised we were going to finish Ruth, and we're going to finish Ruth. We're going to get through Ruth, because Ruth is a short book. It's a quick book. It's easy to get through. It only took us 4 weeks. Hurrah. And but I think it's so essential into the next part of the story that we're about to go to. That's why I said we absolutely cannot skip it. And I love it so much because it's such a great character study on godly human beings, right? You have this godly woman in Ruth who is just so devoted, right? Like, no matter how dark the future looks, no matter how difficult the path seems to be, she says, no, I'm principled. I'm going to stand on my principles. I will die by my principles. And guess what? God rewards her for it. And then we have Boaz, a man who could very easily, in such evil times, right? Again, at the end of Judges, these are not good times. These are really bad times. And yet, again, a man who is principled, who stands on what he knows to be right and true, and he is not willing to bend or flex. He says, no, this is what is right, and he maintains. And so we have these two amazing individuals. And if you remember where we left off last time, Ruth said, I am yours to Boaz. She gave herself to him, and he said, I am flattered, but the law says that this other man has first claim to be your guardian redeemer, not me. And so I need to go settle this with him. And if you remember, Naomi said, yes, he will have this settled today. This was a big deal. It was important. He dropped everything else he was doing in order to go do it. And so that's where we start off in chapter 4. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there just as the guardian redeemer. We're not actually given the name of the man, just he's referred to as the guardian redeemer. He's the one who chiefly has this responsibility. So just as he arrived, he had mentioned, Boaz went up to the town gate, sat down just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along, and Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Now, what's important about the town gate, as a quick parenthesis, you're going to see this a lot, especially through the Old Testament, even into Jesus' day. The town gate is where, like, legal things happened. Right, that's where legal transactions happen. That's where a lot of this stuff happened. It's why in Proverbs we read about the woman who's actually at home working, like doing a job and making fabrics and doing all this stuff. But the man had to go to the gate. Why? Because he had to partake in legal society and do all this stuff. And so the town gate this is where things were happening. And so he knew that if he went to the town gate, despite it being harvest season, that's where he was going to find the guardian redeemer. Remember, this is, of course, before cell phones, so it's not like he can just call him up and say, hey, buddy, I need to talk to you. So he had to go to the local gathering place, which was, of course, the town gate. And then he invites him over to come sit down with him. And then, immediately, right, verse 2, Boaz then takes 10 elders of the town and says, sit here, and they did so. Before he even gets into the business, he's already gathering witnesses, because what is about to happen, he wants to make sure, let no man be able to refute what is about to be said. Let no man ever change their tune. And so he's making sure that he has witnesses ready to be there. So then he said to the guardian redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling a piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. Interesting, because as far as we know, this is the first time the land has ever come up. And yet, if you know anything about Hebrew tradition and stuff like that, or the Israelites, remember when they came into the land, they automatically were given allocations based on their tribe. And so there was an inheritance that followed a family. So Elimelech's family, who Ruth married into, right? Ruth married one of his sons. His family owned a chunk of the land. And of course, the whole idea of a guardian redeemer is the guardian redeemer would come along, allow her, right, have children with her so that she would have sons to carry on Elimelech's name, not the guardian redeemer's name. This is an important thing to remember as we get into this, because right now, what Boaz is doing is he's just proposing a piece of land. Now, in a place where all of the land is already allocated, and you're agrarian, and land means everything, when an opportunity pops up for you to acquire this new land, are you going to do it? You absolutely are, right? This is the deal of, wait a minute, my relative has died and I'm the first in line to get this land. That means that I can expand my crops and my yields and my herds, and I can now expand my wealth and my reach and this is going to be passed down through my lineage, and it's going to make my name great. Like, absolutely, this is something that is appealing. And this is it's important that he presents it in this way. And I think Boaz totally knew what he was doing. Because he wanted to make this about the land and not about Ruth. He said, I thought I should bring the matter to your attention, this is verse 4. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest to you to buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know, for no one has the right to do so except for you when I am next in line. And of course, he says, I will redeem it. Of course he would. Why wouldn't he? Why would you not want it? Like, here you go, it's free land. You want some land? Absolutely. I will take that off your hands and go make my name great. See, Boaz here, he's being a bit crafty, right? Because he knows that the land is incredibly valuable. He's also doing it in the presence of witnesses because he wants there to be a witness to all this account that's going on, right? They've all now seen him say he wants to redeem the land. And not only that, they heard him say, Boaz say, that he, on his advice, he wants to suggest to the guardian redeemer to buy the land, right? He's not saying, oh, this came up and I really want it, so, if you're willing to reject it, I guess I'll, like, he's kind of putting it up reluctantly, or he's putting it up as if, he wants this guy to take it, but really we know that in the end, what he's really after is Ruth. Verse 5, then Boaz said, so of course this guy, he agrees, but he agrees not understanding all of the details of what's about to happen, right? He doesn't yet, even though we ourselves are calling him guardian redeemer, I think it's fair to say he doesn't quite seem to be aware of his apparent role. And I think that becomes clear as we read the rest of the story. It says, Boaz says, on the day that you buy that land from Naomi, okay, so if you're going to redeem it, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get the land from Naomi, but you're also going to acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. This is a very important line. Okay, number one, acquire Ruth does not mean he owned Ruth, okay? What he means by acquire Ruth is acquire the responsibility of Ruth and promoting her line, the line from Mahlon. Remember, that was the name of her husband. You're going to promote his line and his legacy through your hard work. Right? So, and Boaz, we know, is totally willing to do this. Boaz is on board for this. He's okay with this. Why? Because he is a good man. But he knows that is not the time that they are living in. And so he gets the guy to accept, and then he presents us, well, okay, guess what? You don't actually get to keep this land. You're actually going to use this land to promote the name of a dead man and maintain his property. Right? It's not going to be yours, guardian redeemer. It's still going to be the line of Elimelech's, whoever is to come. Right? He's not doing the job for himself, but for his relative. So, of course, at this, the guardian redeemer says, well, then I can't redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it for yourself. I cannot do it. So this is what a lot of people have taken this to mean when he says this, is that he probably is already married, right? Given his status and his relationship and stuff. He's probably already married and probably already has children. And so if he begins having children with another woman in order to help his relative to have his line continue, then in fact it's actually probably going to cause strife between brothers later on in life, right? Because usually the older brother got the larger portion, did all this stuff. But in this case, the youngest brother would be walking away with an entire estate from an entire family. Right? It's understandable what he's doing, but it's also, it's something that's in the law that he's allowed to do, right? He doesn't have to accept this responsibility. He's allowed to pass on the responsibility as long as someone takes it up. And so him recognizing that Boaz has already said he will redeem it if the guardian redeemer doesn't, then suddenly everything changes and he realizes, wait a minute, why would I want to do all this work? Why would I want to promote a dead man's legacy? Forget that, I'm out. Verse 7, and you'll notice this is in parentheses because this is meant to give not only the readers of their time information, but it gives us a great bit of information, because otherwise the next little bit is going to be weird. Where it says, now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. It's a bit strange, but this is a legal agreement, a binding legal agreement. If I take off my sandal and hand it to you, it is a binding legal agreement that I am now transferring ownership from myself to you. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So, verse 8, so the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And so he removed his sandal. Right? He handed over his responsibility. He transferred all his legal, all the legal responsibility that he had as guardian redeemer over to Boaz. Boaz is now the bona fide guardian redeemer. There can be no doubt. And what did he do it in front of? He did it in front of all the witnesses. Why? So that if anyone were to ever cast out and say, wait a minute, Boaz, you weren't supposed to do this. This isn't how the law says. He can say, look, in the presence of witnesses, this was done. So Boaz then announced to the elders and to all the people, today you are the witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all of the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. If you remember, those are the names of his two sons. I have also, of Elimelech's two sons, I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, again, not acquired as in a slave, acquired as in I've acquired the responsibility. I have accepted what I legally need to do under the law for Ruth. I've acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. He does this not for himself, but for his relative. He does this so that Mahlon's name would not be forgotten, so that Elimelech's name would not be forgotten. He does it so that their children will have inheritance, and so that Israel will continue to thrive. This is a very selfless thing that he has done. And you know what? And he does it in the most loving way, right? We've read about who Boaz is, the kind of care and love and affection that he's already shown to Ruth, despite the fact that he had no obligation to her. It's just who he was. He was a good man. He was a great man. So the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. And may you have standing in Ephrath and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring of the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. And that name is going to be, and if you're unfamiliar, remember the line of Judah was going to end, or through Tamar, like I think it was one of Judah's sons, and so Judah was able to continue the line through an act of deception, but still, it continued unto that day because of the guardian redeemership of that family. So this is a big deal because not only has this transfer taken place, not only has Boaz now taken up the responsibility, which, I mean, we all could have predicted was about to happen even if you hadn't read the letter, right? You would have known, okay, this is clearly what's about to happen, because why would someone go through all this trouble and then we end up reading about how, and then some other guy came along and just that's how it went. But no, we've been rooting for Boaz. We wanted Boaz to win. It seems like Boaz and Ruth are going to ride off into the sunset happily ever after. It's a great end to the story, but it gets even better, and that's what I love. And here's the thing. How many of you, when you're reading the Bible, you like to skip the genealogies? Okay, a few nods. Yeah, it happens, right? It can be boring, but at the same time, genealogies are incredibly important, and here we have one. It says, so Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife, and when he made love to her, which is, of course, a euphemism. Okay, Claire's not paying attention. The Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. And so don't worry about it. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who has this day not left you without a guardian redeemer. And may he become famous throughout all of Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you into your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth." So Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son." They named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Okay? And then we're going to get, and if you remember, they talked about Perez. Perez, the son of Tamar. Tamar, of course, the one whom her line was going to end because her husband died, and then she, of course, ends up, through an act of deception, ends up having a son named Perez, and it says, so this is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron of Ram, Ram of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nashron, Nashron the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, and Boaz the father of Obed. And then Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David. Now I read it the way I did, where I kind of paused there at the end of Obed, because the numbers are significant. Number 1, we can read, going all the way back to the line from Tamar, who thought it was so important that she keep the line of her husband going, that she did what she did. Then that line continued on, until she got to Ruth and Boaz. Ruth and Boaz, again, through acts of faith and dedication and lives absolutely principled and willing to serve God no matter how difficult things seemed, continued to persevere. Remember, this is a culture who despises the way that they live. Remember, it says everyone did what was right in their own eyes, not they did right in the eyes of the Lord. These are uncommon people. And so whenever people say to us, yeah, but it would have been easier then because everyone believed in God. No, they didn't. They didn't. If there's anyone you can relate to today, if you think that you've got it difficult because there's been this falling away from church and people are leaving, I would say, look at Ruth and Boaz and their dedication in their lives. They lived in a time far darker than we are now. And yet God rewarded them. How did he reward them? Not only did he put them in this special line, but of course, the father of David, right? 3 generations later, David is born. And if you don't know who that David is, that is King David. The king who brought Israel to its full glory, who was the man after God's own heart. That David is the David whom this Ruth, through her sheer dedication, and who is it that comes after David in that same line? But Jesus Christ himself. Ruth the Moabite, the alien, the outsider, the one who did not belong, was grafted in to the family of God that provided the line directly to the salvation of mankind. If there's anyone here who feels like they can't fit in, if there's anyone that hears the message and they feel like, oh yeah, but I've done too many things, or I wasn't born into the right family or anything, there is no greater evidence that God is willing to bring in the outsiders than that of Ruth and Boaz. We see that Boaz accepted lovingly this outsider. We saw that she became an important figure throughout the entire family of Israel, who eventually led to the birth of our Savior. This is a big deal. And it's something that we should draw hope from, that we should draw inspiration from. That life is hard. And if it's not, then you're in a delusion. Because life is hard. We were talking about it this morning. Sometimes we like to run on the emotional high of things, and that can get us so far. I compared it when I was talking to Michelle about it this morning. I compared it to young love, right? Because when you're young and in love for the first time, there is nothing wrong in the world. Everything is perfect. Isn't that right, Rachel? There can be no wrong. But eventually, as your mom can tell you, because she's been married for 35 years coming up, eventually that young love wears away. And unless there's a foundation beneath, unless there's something there substantial to hold you, then it all just falls away. I love this because I can look back in the Bible and I can see even from, remember, this is very early on. What is this, the 7th book of the Bible? No, 8th. Eighth book of the Bible. It's very early on. It's very early in the story. And yet God was even showing us even then, hey, I've made a foundation for you. I've made a way for you to be saved. Even before Christ, I've made a way for you to be brought into the family of Abraham. I've made a way for you to be brought into the promise of salvation. And there can be no greater hope than that. When things get dark, and they will, and things get trying, and they will, we got to persevere just like Ruth. We got to hold on to our integrity like Boaz. To continue to do what's right, and God will bless you for it. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be trials along the way, or troubles, or a lot of it, because there will. Think Boaz had it easy all that time? I mean, he was literally out there winnowing and threshing grain himself and working on himself. If he was a great big rich landlord, he wouldn't have been doing that, right? And I'm sure he had to contend with raids from the Moabites just like everyone else. But he persevered and he held true to what he knew to be right. He followed the Lord with all of his heart. And Ruth, who would have had a much easier time if she just went back home to Moab, to her family, who could have found her a better husband, made her life easier. But she never, ever would have met Boaz. She never would have become part of the line of David, and part of the line of Christ. And we never would have read her story. But we read about her because of who she was, her strength of character, her love and devotion for the Lord, despite not being born in the right family. Doesn't matter as long as you live for God today.